Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I know we had a few little hiccups getting signed on, but I think we're all set to go now. I'm really excited about this series that we started earlier this year on socioeconomic well-being. As some of you may know, Conexion was started 17 years ago, focusing on the changing demographics in the United States, and specifically the Hispanic Latino demographic, which is the second largest after white non-Hispanic, and continues to be and will be for the foreseeable future. And I know that when I say that, people look at me like, and so what, who cares? So that's why we're doing this series, because there's enormous implications in this shift in the composition of the US. And tonight's speakers will really speak to that shift and the implications inherent in that shift and some of the systems and structures that can facilitate or inhibit intergenerational wealth creation and socioeconomic well-being, and also the choices that we make along the way. And as my father used to say, you have to educate the people. So that's what I'm doing by presenting these two gentlemen, David Morales and Jeff Fuhrer. Before we get started, Lisette, next slide, please. I just want to thank our partners, Hollister Group and Kip Hollister, and Mass Business Roundtable and JD Cheslov and TJX, many partners with TJX who have been all across the United States supporting Conexion and investing in their Latino employees. I also want to thank UniCare for their support of Conexion and David for his generous support. And before we go any further, I want to turn the floor over briefly to an old friend, old in the sense I've known him for a number of years, Marquise Benton with Loomis Sales. He and I met a number of years ago when he was at the Federal Reserve, as was Jeff Fuhrer. So this is sort of a mini reunion for Jeff, Marquise, and myself. So Marquise, if you'd like to say a few things about why you're here, other than hearing Jeff, of course.
So good evening, and I'm very excited to be here, and want to just say happy Hispanic Heritage Month. I think this is fantastic, and as Phyllis mentioned, I've had the honor of working with both her and Conexion and Jeff for a number of years at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Jeff is an amazing leader, and he's been charging and pushing forward on DEI even before he had the formal role at the Federal Reserve. So it was great to partner with him when I was there. When Phyllis called me with this opportunity, I jumped at it. I'm looking forward to rekindling our relationship and better connecting with Conexion and getting some of our talent here at Loomis Sales lined up with the leadership development programs that Conexion brings to the table every day. So with that, I think tonight's dialogue with Mr. Morales and Mr. Fuhrer, facilitated by Mrs. Barahona, will be both thought-provoking and engaging, and I can't wait to get started. So let's get ready to rumble.
Okay, and thank you. And next slide, thank you. And again, this is Evelyn Barahona, who is the chair of our board. I want to thank her for moderating tonight, David Morales, and Evelyn is going to introduce David and Jeff Fuhrer. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you. I'm so excited. Evelyn, take it away.
I think I'm more excited. In fact, I've been accused by my husband that I created this event, which is not true. But welcome, Conexionistas and our partners. I'm very excited to be here. This theme of discussion is a continuation of something that Conexion has been committed to, and bringing forth discussions related to themes around uplifting opportunities for Latinos, especially during this time of COVID, building wealth, and also elevating report findings that highlight the data points related to Latinos, both in Massachusetts and across the country. One of the things that I'm most excited about is just how intentional Conexion has been in broadening these discussions. And more importantly, this dialogue that we're going to be in sort of with Jeff and David is really just like a highlight of the importance of having differences in terms of our discussions, as well as sort of looking at the intersections in which we have shared ideas and elevating that in a very, productive and informative way. Some of the things that, in continuation with the theme of Conexion, is some of these realities that we see and sort of the dichotomies that we experience as a community. For example, Massachusetts is considered one of the most prosperous states in America, given our sectors, education, and systems that we have in place, yet last year, in the last few months, the Gaston Institute, LEF, and the Boston Indicators highlighted in the report that our Latino community in Massachusetts had the highest poverty rate compared to other Latinos across the country. So seeing those sort of the challenges and the differences, I'm really looking forward to Jeff and David's dialogue, both from a personal perspective and also from a data and public policy that hopefully will, have you guys ponder and think about your own narratives and how you've navigated your careers and what you see to be the structures and systems that we can update and make better for all. So here are the expectations for tonight. Our event tonight is going to be broken up in 3 parts. The first one will be having each speaker sort of provide an overview and background of sort of their work and perspective related to tonight's subject matter. That will be followed by a mini Q&A. And then we will convene both speakers and have a moderated dialogue where you as our audience will be able to share your questions in the chat room. And then what we'll do is we'll pause at moments and take in questions and make this interactive. And we hope that you're excited to participate as well as listen and learn and hopefully give your perspective as you learn and have the key takeaways from these 2 wonderful speakers. Jeff Fuhrer will be the first one that will provide an overview. For those not familiar with Jeff, he is currently an Eastern Bank Foundation Fellow and also economist that has worked with the Federal Reserve and mass development. He's also been an advocate and partner for Conexion, and his current work focuses on equity through a structural lens, taking into account data and personal stories. We are very excited to have him join. And then for those, you might know David because we recently highlighted his most recent published memoir called American Familia. We're excited to have him also share his perspective related to his memoir, but more importantly, his lived experience. He's also a healthcare and public policy leader and has worked for the governor's office, and most recently has been a healthcare executive at Anthem and then previously at Steward. He's a dedicated leader in our community, and we're just very excited to have him as a champion for our work. So with that said, let's welcome Jeff and have him share what he has to say.
Thanks so much, Evelyn. It's great to be here tonight. Great to see old friends. Marquise and I go way back. We worked in the trenches together for many years, sharing the trials and the tribulations and the triumphs occasionally of the DEI work at the Fed. And Marquise was the expert. I was the cheerleader, but good to see you all tonight. I just want to say that it's so important, especially today, to be able to discuss issues on which we may have some different perspectives and different conclusions, but do so without screaming or yelling or eye rolling or any of the sorts of things that you can see on media outlets today. I'm actually quite confident there won't be any of that this evening. And another important preamble note is that this conversation between David and I, which I really do hope the audience joins into, it's based on mutual respect between the two of us. As I understand it, we share a lot of common core values. We have a common concern for the well-being of people. We both want to give back. That respect, to my mind, is a critical starting point. We may not agree on everything. I don't know anybody who does agree with me on many things, but I think that respect and civility is going to remain throughout the discussion and really make it a much more productive discussion. So with that, I just want to I have 5 points that I want to make as I start this evening. Some of them are very quick. So point number 1, this, as you know, this discussion is about economic inequality, opportunity, the importance of work, individual responsibility, and so on, and then the importance of systems and how that all works together. So the first point I want to make is that hard work, determination, personal responsibility, grit, all of those things are absolutely required for anyone to attain a reasonable measure of economic success in this country, and I think most any other country. There's just no question about it. We also want to just a little asterisk to that, work-life balance also matters, because along with the hard work, you want to make sure that doesn't drive us crazy. But that's point 1, is there's no question that hard work, the determination, the personal responsibility is an important part of success. Second point, we cannot ever tell the current generation or anyone else that because the system isn't perfect, that they're not going to succeed. That's a terrible message to send to any generation. We want to work with the current economic system, taking it as given for now, and figure out how best to get people to succeed within it. So that's second point. We don't want this conversation tonight is not a downer. It's not a discouraging thing. It's about how to make things work well in a variety of ways. The third point is that having acknowledged the importance of personal responsibility, I think it's also important to recognize that our economic system does not provide yet equal opportunity to everyone. Where and how you start off in life, it turns out, matters quite a bit, although it's not the only thing that matters, of course. And importantly, children have no choice over where they start off. It just happens to them. So that's an important first thing. But related to this third point is that as a consequence, I feel that we need to be really careful not to lay blame for lack of success on whole groups of individuals, but instead recognize the ways in which our system has set up barriers to success for far too many people. Of course, it's true that some people will not succeed because they don't put the work in, and that's their responsibility. But when we look at whole swaths of people, we can't say, well, they didn't work hard enough. And one way of thinking about that is very simple. When I survey the economic data, I can see that there are millions of families with many more millions of individuals who are not doing well. They're not earning reasonable incomes. They have not been able to accumulate wealth. All sorts of ways they're not doing well. It can't be that the reason that all of those millions have not succeeded is just because they didn't put the effort in. Can't be right. And I see that in the data, and I think all of us know from talking to folks who are living in lower income communities that's not the case. Many, most are working really hard, but not able to succeed because of barriers that exist. So that's the third point. Those barriers matter for all the reasons I articulated. We have to be cognizant of them. It's not the end of the story, but we have to be aware of them. The fourth point is that what that means, I think, is that as we work with and encourage and motivate and provide the tools for success to people today, we should at the same time work to improve the economic system that we live in, primarily to improve access to opportunities to build human and financial capital. So that's critical, right? These things go together in my mind. Absolutely. Like the work that David does, which I think is incredibly admirable, which is working with people to provide them the tools, the opportunity, the ways of thinking about personal responsibility and grit, I think he calls it. Those are critical. Alongside that, we want to work to improve the economic system. So let me highlight a few ways in which I think we could do better. Number one, I'll start in terms of age here. Number one, early childhood education. Research is overwhelming in showing that is critical for success. And we know that not everyone has access to good early childhood education. If you start off without the good early childhood education, it's difficult to overcome. It's not impossible, but it is difficult. So that's the first thing we can work on at the system level, early childhood education. The second is building clearer pathways from education to employment. And in that regard, our community college system is really unfortunately underutilized. There are really good examples within some systems of pathways from high school to the community college to employment that are really quite successful. We need to use those more broadly. And in that regard, the private sector is a critical partner in those sorts of efforts. They're the ones who have the jobs at the end of the pipeline. And in the best examples of that model, the private sector is a huge help and has been a terrific help. Third is that housing is foundational. If you don't have a stable base to live in, whether you're a renter or an owner, it's really difficult to make your way. There's plenty of both lived experience and research on that. There, I think it's important first to address zoning restrictions that make it really difficult to build an adequate amount of housing stock, especially for low income and low to moderate income individuals. So that's fixable, but it takes concerted effort. That's part of the system. At the level of the private sector, I think we should aspire to an economy in which all jobs, no matter what you're doing for your employer, pay reasonable wages, provide decent benefits, provide predictable schedules, and a number of attributes that are not as common especially among low-wage jobs as we'd like. And here the private sector would be a key partner in fixing this. They probably need some assistance in doing so, but obviously that can't be achieved without the partnership with the private sector. There's some other things that could use fixing, and of course healthcare, childcare access are still not accessible to many people. But one final thing here I want to mention is that there are a number of government programs that generally are well-intentioned, but they work in ways that don't help. And so, for example, there are a number of programs that will drop benefits when your assets get to be too high. If you have too much in your checking and savings account, for example, SNAP, the food stamp program, can cut you off. The same is true for income cutoffs for a number of programs. And what that means is that if you want to keep some of those benefits, the way those programs are structured might make you disinclined to do more work, to earn more income, to accumulate more assets. That can't be right. We want people to work more, to earn more, and to accumulate assets. So those are problems with existing programs that we need to fix. So that's all part of point 4. That is, in addition to encouraging personal responsibility, we want to fix pieces of the system that are suboptimal. The last one I want to talk about, which is in some ways a bit more abstract, but in other ways it's completely accessible, and that is that we carry in our heads all the time narratives, that is, simple stories that we use to make sense of the world, that are often damaging. They're often used in two ways. They're used to dismiss poor outcomes that we see in the economy as somehow unavoidable, the natural product of a free market capitalist society or something. Or in the worst case, a narrative might say, well, these poor outcomes arise because people aren't working hard enough. Probably a damaging thing to say in most cases. So those same sets of narratives, and I'll say a little bit more what they are in just a second, are also used historically, have been used historically up to the very recent history to advocate for tax and for safety net policies that largely benefit the rich and the powerful, not so much the low income and often people of color, and therefore end up perpetuating bad outcomes. So narratives seem like a simple thing. They're so pervasive and so widely used that they matter. So it's important to be aware of them. And my sense is we need to change them, because otherwise we're going to continue to cause damage in that way. So the key narratives I have in mind are, 1, hard work is sufficient to obtain success. It is necessary to obtain success. It is an important aspiration that it would be nice if everyone who worked hard achieved success. It is not the case in the economy today. That matters as a narrative, because if it were true, then all we need to do to fix things in the whole economy is to get people to work harder, or to exercise better judgment, or more personal responsibility. But instead, often people blame it on the folks who are not doing well. And of course, there are exceptions to this, but in many cases, it's just not right. The second narrative is that we're a post-racist country and society. So I do not have the lived experience with this, but having talked to hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people, and having read lots and lots of stuff, I think that's another aspiration, but it's not true just yet. Why does that matter? It matters because the effects of our systemic and institutional racism are still felt today. And the simplest way to see that is in the differences in wealth accumulated across different categories. Sandy Darity, who's a researcher on wealth disparity, says that is the best way of summarizing the cumulative effect of systemic discrimination on families today, is to look at the differences in wealth. And those differences, as you know, are enormous. So we need to, I think, be honest about our country's history. It's not that we want to belabor it or wallow in guilt, but we do want to recognize where we as a country have been responsible for harm and fix it. The third narrative that matters is that businesses' only goal is to maximize shareholder value if they're publicly owned, or maximize profits. That is a widely held narrative. There's no law saying it has to be true, but it is widely practiced narrative. And there's some folks the problem is that they've taken it to an extreme. Of course it's wise to steward your profits. Of course it's wise to take care of costs and try to become more innovative and productive, maximize your market share and so on. That's all good. But what's happened in the economy is the easiest way to fulfill that maxim is to minimize the cost of labor. And for far too many corporations, the way they've done that is reduce wages, reduce benefits, make working conditions worse. That can't be right. And there are some great CEOs of companies, and we have representatives on this call, who do well by their employees. And that's exactly what should be happening. But there are many who don't take that same approach. So that narrative matters, the notion that maximizing profits is essential. The final one is the final point I want to make on this, and then I'll close, is that I think those narratives have to go. Some are aspirational. If we could make an economy where hard work really was sufficient to success, I would applaud it. I think, of course, that's a great thing. But at present, those narratives are not helping. They're either too simplistic or they're dismissive of some of the structural barriers. But in any event, they're harming our economy, importantly. So in closing, I'm an optimistic guy. I believe in the potential of every person born in this country and everyone born on the planet for that matter. And I want people to have hope, and I want their hopes to be realized. So everyone has his or her own part in that, no question. That's the grit and the determination part. Some people will succeed without working hard, but you really can't count on that. That kind of luck doesn't come around very often. So that is absolutely required. And we need to encourage the practice of determination, of grit, of persistence, personal responsibility, because those are essential to surviving and thriving. But we also need to create an economy of equal opportunity. We're not there yet, in my estimation. But as I often say, we broke this, we can fix it. And a lot more people will succeed if they put in the effort, if we do make those systemic changes. So that's what I wanted to start with. Thanks for that time, Evelyn.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate those points. And I just want to speak to the audience that if you have questions, feel free to put it in the chat. As we wait, I'm going to kick us off with a few questions for Jeff before we transition to David and our Q&A. Your description that you just provided suggests that the system is stacked against a lot of people, especially communities of color. What would you tell a young Latino who wants to succeed financially in the US today?
But the good news is that the sponsors of this, not just Loomis Sales, but the sponsors of this called Conexion, are involved in the kind of work that can help us get past some of the barriers. You know, of course, yes, people need to put in the time and the effort, but the ability to network with folks who have connections that can get you to the next level, that can get you the exposure that you deserve but may not be getting. That, I mean, I'm just singing the praises of Conexion here. That is the kind of thing that can really make a difference. Of course, wherever possible, take advantage of educational opportunities. Be aware of if financial resources are limited, and they most often are for all of us, but where they're limited, there are some ways to get education with some financial assistance. Pell Grants are an incredibly helpful way of doing things that don't force you to take on too much student debt. Be aware, however, if you do take on student debt, what is the likelihood that you'll be able to pay that off given the career path that you're aiming for. But, you know, as I said, I do want to give hope. The system isn't perfect, but we can work with it, and we can work with it because of the work that Conexion, that people like David are doing, and others around the country who are trying to work given the barriers that we have. So that's what I would say is there are ways to succeed. It does take some extra effort, which I wish were not the case, but there are ways to make it given the good work of people like David and like Conexion.
Sure. We have a question that asks, how do we counter fact deniers into, you know, part of this narrative and trying to sort of reshape ways to improve the system?
I wish I had a good answer for that. What I would say two things. One, just affirm the question. That's a growing problem that many folks don't trust facts. They don't trust the people who provide the facts. That seems, and that's a problem because to make decisions in a complex environment like ours, we need to be able to trust people who do know what the facts are. So it's a problem, number one. But number two, I think the more we can engage in conversations like this, where we're not yelling at each other, we're listening to each other. If someone denies the facts, we need a relationship with them, a context in which we can talk about why we disagree about that. And then there's at least some hope that the most important facts actually will get through over time. I think it's difficult if you think you know the facts and somebody's saying something wrong and you just tell them they're an idiot. You know, the conversation's over. You've established who you think's the most important, and there's no relationship there. So I think that's how we handle fact deniers on a person-to-person basis: is have conversations that are based in respect. Every person you talk to is still an individual who deserves your respect, right? Everybody deserves your respect. So you have to listen and maybe get to the root of why they have a concern that leads to their denying facts. You have a chance of changing things. At the national level, that's more complicated. There, I think we need some more courageous leaders to speak out. And that's not an easy thing to come by, but there's some who do.
Right, we have time for one more question. And someone from the audience asked, it was addressed that there are systemic barriers. How do you think people can overcome those systemic barriers in order to build wealth?
So it's not a simple thing, and it's not a quick thing. I think the best way to think about building wealth, given the current system, is number one, budget carefully. Make up a budget that says, what do I need? And then the stuff you want, we wait for a little bit. What do I need? How much does that cost? And how can I systematically put aside some money in reasonably safe savings and investment vehicles? Not for a year or two, but for 10 or 20 years, right? If you can do that. And also make that savings not a function of your feeling about how much you want to save from day to day. Kind of take a set it and forget it approach. There's a lot of research and practical experience that shows that this is the way I started saving when I was 25 or so. Started seriously saving. I just set an automatic amount to come out of my paycheck. It went in the savings. I never touched it. And that way I was able to accumulate some savings over time. That doesn't mean you can equalize the wealth gap between the wealthiest wealthy person or rich person and the poorest person of color. You probably won't, but you will probably accumulate enough savings to take care of really important things in your life, buffering against expenditure or expense or income disruptions, saving if you are called to become an entrepreneur, to start a business, saving for your education, making sure there's some provision for your retirement. You can probably do some of that. And that discipline, I think, is a really important one to think about early on, because it is much easier to accumulate if you start early and just set it and forget it than if you wait until you have a little extra and put it away sometimes and other times not.
I'd also like to add, related to this question about building wealth, is also understanding your money history. There are people and individuals and families that have experienced a lot of money trauma. And oftentimes there could be a psychological cycle in terms of how you interact with money. And I think one of the ways to cut through that is understanding that money is a tool and not a definition of who you are. And it's about maximizing how you navigate those tools. And sometimes it's just understanding what is your interaction with it, both when you have it and you don't have it. And also, having access to education. I think oftentimes in our community, we see tools to wealth, sometimes often in homes, which is fantastic, but we overlook other tools like investment plans, retirement plans, and even thinking about having money work for you. So I do believe that the more education there is out there, especially in Latino communities, beyond what we define as money, and in building wealth, is one of the ways we cut through both those money narratives as well as creating new narratives based on where we are and our aspirations.
That's such an important point. I think just to pick up on one piece of it, if somebody comes to you with an investment vehicle, whatever it is, it could be a way of getting owner-occupied housing, it could be a way of investing in the stock market or some other stuff, and you really don't understand it, don't do it. Yeah. Right? Just don't do it. It's an easy way to get in trouble, because you may expose yourself to risks that are going to set you up for failure, and that you just don't need that. So either get somebody to explain it to you in simple terms, or I've had many conversations with people about Bitcoin. Nobody's explained it to me in terms that that make me feel safe about investing in Bitcoin. I actually know enough about Bitcoin to be dangerous, and for that reason, I don't put money into Bitcoin. I'm worried about it deeply. I'm worried about what are the real fundamentals of that. Same applies for anything, though. If you don't really understand it, don't do it. You need to know what the risks are and what the possible rewards are as well.
The importance of due diligence and really doing your research, and going toward trusted advisors that are either accredited or have knowledge about that is really key.
Right.
Well, thank you, Jeff. We're going to rejoin in a few minutes. And in the interim, we're going to turn over to David. So for David, we're going to start with a few questions about providing background related to his book, and then get into the discussion about self-agency. And one of the things, for those not familiar with his book, maybe one of the questions to help with that is maybe asking, what inspired you to write a book about your personal story?
Thank you, Evelyn. It is a true pleasure and an honor to be with all of you today and to share this time with Jeff and you, Evelyn, and Phyllis and the team at Conexion. For background, I come from a blessed family of hardworking Hispanic Americans, from my grandparents to my parents, who toiled diligently to bring us to the United States to give us an opportunity. And I'm married to the most wonderful woman who traveled here from Dominican Republic in search of a better opportunity. So from my point of view, why I wrote the book is called American Familia, a memoir of perseverance. It is a conversation between a father and two sons. And I wrote the book for several reasons. First and foremost, one, I wanted to leave a legacy for my two sons. And I wanted to leave a legacy for young people to understand that America is indeed the greatest country on the planet and a land of opportunity. Number two, I wrote an op-ed in the Boston Globe, December of 2017, called The Invisible Yet Resilient Latino. Phyllis mentioned that we're the fastest growing population. But what's interesting is that a lot of the messaging around Hispanics has been about victimhood. Well, let me tell you, we are the most resilient population on the face of the planet. And so I wanted to have some voice and some representation about who we are. We're not victims. We're entrepreneurs, we're doctors, we're executives, we're leaders, and we are producers. And so I wanted to change the narrative about who we are as people. Our history in this country goes back 100+ years to contributing greatly, especially in all of our wars. The third reason why I wrote the book, I wanted to have families to start a conversation. Strong families are the foundation of America. Strong families build great countries. Strong families build wonderful futures. And so I wanted families to start conversations about who they are, their journey to better, and to empower their children to do better. And then finally, I wrote the book because at the end of the day, there has to be a voice around 4 things that help children and people to understand their positions and their influence and what I call self-agency differently today. That's first, your identity. Understand who you are. I like to tell people I'm a child of God and anything is possible in America, anything. Number 2, your purpose. Each one of us is built for a purpose. Each one of us has a mission. Understand that mission and pursue it. Number 3, your values. Your values matter. My values are built on Galatians 5:22. It's called the fruits of the Spirit. Be kind, be joyful, be peaceful, etc. And then finally, there's your mindset. Mindsets matter. If you have a positive mindset, you can absolutely achieve virtually anything you put your mind to. But if you have a weak mindset, you can't even get off the starting line. And so those 4 pieces are narratives that I'd like to encourage people to think about. How do I think about my identity, my purpose, my values, and my mindset? And so from my point of view, the book is a wonderful opportunity for families to think about their own personal journeys. So that's the why behind the book.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. And going back to self-agency, can you take a moment and define how you describe self-agency? And from your perspective, can individuals learn it, or is it something that you believe it's inherited?
Yeah, that's a great question, Evelyn. So self-agency, from my point of view, is very, very simple. It is an individual's ability to have control over his or her actions and mindset. And so far too often, we have these abstract conversations about a system or the world, or someone did something and now I can't do something. And from my point of view, I can only control what I control, right? I can only shape or influence what I have the ability to influence. And that's why I go back to the 4 pillars: your identity, your purpose, your values, your mindset. And so self-agency is my way of helping myself over the past 20+ years understand what is it that I need to focus my attention on. If it's wealth building, well, my wife and I have a very simple concept. Over 2/3 of Americans live check to check. We can control that, right? We have the ability, as Jeff said, to think about our spending habits, our budget, our income, and what's a need versus what's a want. And so from my point of view, I have the ability to think about my money, as you said, as a tool to either do wonderful things or to spend it all and say, boy, where did my money go? So that's one piece. And then the other piece is it learned, or are you born with it? I'm not sure what the answer is, but I can tell you that have not perfected it. I worked hard every day to think clearly about what are the right decisions and choices I should make. Let me give you an example. When I was in college, I was directed, I shouldn't say I was directed, I had a high curiosity around social studies. And so I focused a lot of my time reading around sociology, archaeology, anthropology, essentially liberal arts, right? A small group of my friends were studying economics and finance. And guess what? When I graduated, I realized, boy, I should have taken economics and finance as my major. And why is that important? It's important because, believe it or not, over the past 27 years of my career, it's really been around analytics and finance, where I have been able to make a wonderful living and a blessed life. And so that what should have been an opportunity for me to think critically at the time to say, interesting, if my economic opportunity is going to be better by understanding finance and economics, I'm heading in that direction, as opposed to the social studies where comparatively your income scale may not be as great.
Yeah, and I think those two things that you described, I mean, the first one going back to the mindset, I think when we feel like we're not in control of things, it could feel disempowering. So taking this sort of shift of like, what can I control? I think it's an added benefit to feeling empowered, even if the situation is limited. And I think that plays a huge role. The other thing that you mentioned that about your college choice is, I think that goes back to what you see in your environment. If you haven't been exposed to that, oftentimes you'll go on a path, even when you do have an opportunity, that you don't realize that perhaps it's not well aligned, or it will not give you a better outcome economically to shift your, your like social standing stance. So I think those things do play a role. I do want to speak to the audience and say that if you do have questions, feel free to put it in the chat box for this specific area of the conversation. Otherwise, I think we have time for one more question before we merge and start our dialogue with both Jeff and David. Feel free to share it now. But in the interim, I'd like to ask, how has your career been shaped by external factors that you couldn't control? Speaking of control.
We could be here for days.
Maybe 5 minutes.
In many ways, Evelyn. So look, just to be very transparent, I come from very humble beginnings, but I've been blessed by Jesus with a wonderful supportive family. When I started working in 1997, I can tell you that I distributed probably over 500 resumes and spent months walking around trying to find work. And I can tell you that a lot of doors are closed to me. And so I made an intentional decision at the time to think critically and said, okay, where is my best opportunity to earn a living? And after about 7 interviews, I was able to get a job. And I raised that example because there were many external factors I couldn't control. I couldn't control whether people wanted to hire me. I couldn't control whether people thought I had the right skills or the right culture. I was the first Hispanic hired in the House Ways and Means Committee in Massachusetts when I started working. They didn't hire me because I was Hispanic. They hired me because I was extremely strong with finance and with my college education around Excel spreadsheets, et cetera. And so I couldn't control any of it. But what I could control was how I dressed. I bought a suit from Macy's, which we put on a credit card. I presented myself well, and I pitched myself in a way that I thought could add value to the committee. And so I couldn't control anything else, but what I could control was how I spoke, how I presented myself, how I presented the information that I was pursuing, and finally, how I could fit into the work value stream that they were looking for. They were looking for financial analysts. I thought I could fit that role. And so I spent time very carefully studying, preparing for the interview and the role. External factors will always play a role in how we think about our lives, how we think about our professions. But again, you can't control external factors. You can only control how you present yourself, how you prepare yourself, and probably as importantly, how you relate to others and think about your social network.
And speaking of social network, I don't see a question in the chat box, so I feel comfortable asking. How do you see the role of support networks like mentors and organizations like Lennoxone playing a role in the trajectory of your career?
Yeah, it's crucial. So first of all, big kudos and shout out to the work Conexion is doing. It is crucial, fundamental. You know, I had this conversation with a former colleague last Wednesday over lunch, and they asked me, you know, David, we live at a time where demographics are shifting aggressively. The population is changing in the United States. How should we, it was another executive, another CEO, how should we think about going from 0 to 100, giving opportunity to somebody who may not have the skill set, but you know they're somebody who could potentially fill the role, but may not be you know somebody who's a person of color, et cetera. And so my response was, look, you know, first and foremost, you don't need to go from 0 to 100. My advice to you is bring people in under what were called apprenticeship models, right? Where you start grooming and preparing people for the work or for the opportunity ahead, whatever that role is. And so mentorship matters big time, whether it's in the professional world, whether it's networking. How we mentor and prepare people for the workforce is truly important. You shouldn't expect to put somebody who may not have the full experience in a role and set them up to fail.
Exactly.
So A, yes, prepare somebody for the role, but B, you know, frankly, we all have to open our social networks to people that may not be comfortable with, so that we start expanding our own horizons, but also giving other people opportunities to grow in the workforce.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think in what you just described is also the intentionality of those like connections. And also if you're going to put someone in the role, not do a checkbox, but really think about how do we set them up to succeed? Because oftentimes I've seen people put in roles where they do feel like a checkbox, but there's no support system to get them to succeed. And I think that's really critical. And I will say personally that in my career trajectory, Conexion and mentors and contacts and people in my social network have been very pivotal in just being able to access opportunities to really great opportunity, to great career choices. So I'm a testament, cohort 2, shout out. So now I want to include Jeff into the fold. And we're going to enter into more of a moderated dialogue based on sort of like the key overviews that you've provided, both structures and systems and self-agency and experience, and start you guys off with, and also before I go into the question, just letting the audience and the Conexionistas know that please feel free to make comments, questions, anything that comes up, because we want to make this very interactive. And although we are in a Zoom setup, we are doing our best. This is sort of the alternative for in-person. So the more interactive that you have, we will take moments to pause and also like infuse those questions into this discussion as well. But to kick us off, something that you guys described, I think very separately, but I now want to be a little bit more poignant, is I'd love to hear from you guys about the role of public policy and the influence it has based on what you shared today, both personally and from what your perspective you see in our society. And maybe if it's okay, start off with David and then Jeff, if that's okay.
Sure, thanks, Evelyn. So public policy is crucial. I'm going to try to be as diplomatic as I can be, but there are many examples of well-intentioned public policy with bad outcomes. And so depending on our objective, public policy can play a role or can be a very harmful role. Let me give you an example. Over 2/3 of businesses in America are small businesses. Massachusetts, same data point. The majority of businesses are small businesses. And so when you start looking at regulatory structures, laws, regulations, the amount of expense that small business has to incur to be able to even start a business sometimes are 3 to 4 more expensive, either per capita or net versus a large business. And so public policy can play a role in that, right? There have been laws and regulations passed that absolutely make it really difficult for small businesses to thrive and compete, number one. Number two, there can be ways to rethink how we encourage our small businesses to thrive. So tax policy, tax credits, deductions. or capital offsets for businesses. So public policy plays a massive role in how we think about success for either individuals or small businesses, which are the heart and soul of American enterprise.
Thank you.
So I agree with David on this. When I was at the Federal Reserve back in 2010, the Dodd-Frank Act was passed. A bunch of regulations, mostly aimed, of course, at financial institutions. It became clear quickly that you couldn't apply the same set of regulations to smaller banks that you had to the large systemically important banks. And frankly, it was the large systemically important banks that got us into the biggest trouble. They had the largest effect on the economy. And so the Fed, I don't think they've completed this mission, but they started a mission to try to relieve some of the regulatory burden on small businesses. And outside of the Fed, I am with David. I think there's some things that do need to be regulated for safety reasons and so on. That's fine, but when it puts too many small businesses at a competitive disadvantage, it's time to reevaluate. And so, I'm all for that. I think in the best of circumstances, the role that public policy can play is twofold. One is it's good to have a safety net because there are times due to circumstances beyond people's control, they fall, they are knocked down, and they need a safety net just to make sure they can get back up again. So there's legitimate debate about what that should look like and so on, but that's a role that the government should play. And that's fine. The second role, though, is given the way the economy works now, I think the best sorts of policies that the government can put in place are those that ensure that everyone has opportunity to succeed. Not give you success, not just give you money. There's a debate about universal basic incomes now. We could talk about that. It has its adherents. I'm actually more for making sure that there are policies that affect our structure so that everyone has an opportunity to succeed, which is not quite true today. There are still barriers, there are still impediments. When they do that, when they provide opportunity to build human capital, so through skills, education, steady employment, and affordable housing, now we've started to build an economy that's more self-sustaining, is less reliant on government support. That's where we'd like to be. I don't believe we're there today, but that's sort of the goal of policy, I think, is to give people the opportunity so that they can contribute to the economy, so that they can build a sustainable economic existence, ultimately without any government support. That's the success. Policies that leave people to stay on government support, something went wrong there. So those are two important roles, I think, for the government to kind of level the playing field, provide opportunity. And once that's done, if we could achieve that, that may take a generation or so, I don't know. But once that's done, they can start to move out of the way more. Until then, I think they need to fulfill that role as well as the role of just providing a safety net. Because there are going to be bumps along the road, and bumps is a euphemism. Things are much harder than bumps for many people sometimes. We don't want them to fall down. We don't want them to not survive those bumps. And that's what a good safety net is for. That's an appropriate role as well. So public policy really matters, but it has to be constructed properly, right-sized, as David points out, for the size of the business or the financial institution, and then also aimed at getting people to sustainable employment and economic existence. That's the goal.
So I have a follow-up question related to the public policy that I'm curious about. So from the government side, it's very clear that they play a huge role. Is there a role for, let's say, an average citizen that is looking to advocate? How would they impact public policy? Just to sort of share with the Conexionistas ways in which even like a private citizen can participate.
So yes, I can think of two ways that I think citizens should participate. The first and the most obvious is where you see ways that the government is not operating the way you think it should. It's either over penalizing small business with regulation, or it's putting up barriers or not providing access. Then you talk to your political candidates and say, this is the issue we want you to talk about. We don't need you to talk as much about some issues that are in the news today that are really not affecting too many people, right? I'll at the risk of offending some folks, but where transgender folks use the bathroom, some people may worry about that. That is not the number one burning issue in the country today. There are much more important issues. So getting politicians to focus on that by voting, that's the best thing an individual citizen can do in terms of influencing public policy. But the second thing I'd add, and this goes to some of the comments that David and others made that I completely endorse, in a way that when you receive the benefits of a mentorship, you become part of a community. And to the extent that you can extend that community so that your benefit from that program spills over to other folks, and you start to build a broader and broader community of support, right? We're all in this together. As David said, and I believe this too personally, we're all children of God. Let's think about it that way. Everybody deserves an equal opportunity. Everybody deserves to be part of this community. So the more you can build communities that support one another in a variety of ways, the less we'll need public policy perhaps, or the more you organize to change public policy as a community. But in either way, building the community, I think, is really vital. In some ways in the US today, for reasons that we don't have time to go into, communities are being pulled apart. That's not a good thing. Community has been one of our strongholds after family, one of our most important strongholds historically, and we'd like to see that rebuilt. And we can be part of that. Conexion is one of the communities that achieves that goal, but there are many others.
Evelyn, I'm going to add a few things that might inspire some questions for us. The first one is, I agree with Jeff. People must vote. That is our constitutional right. It is a privilege. We have to encourage people to vote. Number two, I strongly advise people to vote policy. Don't vote personality. Don't vote race or ethnicity.
Right.
Vote policy. Policy matters. When somebody says they're going to, and this is just my personal position, when someone says they're going to increase your taxes, listen to them. From my point of view, not good, right? And so vote policy, number two. Number three, there's a notion and a belief that more government is good. And frankly, I don't agree with that. I actually think that people in communities have had more of a positive effect in the history of America than government. And so we have to think about our republic as a group of people in communities that come together to enable each other to succeed. Government does not produce money. We do. Communities and families produce good outcomes. Government does not. Government is a subset and a part, right? And then finally, the other piece I'll say is we have to teach people, our young folks especially, that our elected representatives work for us. They're not our leaders. They are elected representatives. And so we have to flip mindset to say, wait a second, I am a shareholder and they are supposed to do what I want them to do. And so we have to flip the mindset to say your elected representative is not your leader. You get the choice, you get the voice, you get to vote, you get to direct policy.
And thank you for saying that. I think oftentimes that's not emphasized enough. We think that we vote in our leaders and therefore they sort of just go on their own agenda. But in reality, we are part of that agenda. And the more we can sort of, for a better description, like organize, whether it's through a nonprofits that exist in communities that are very targeted toward bills, I think that is one way to be informed, and also understanding how bills and policies are made and where are the points of intervention in which you can interact as a engaged citizen and participate in the civic process.
I like the term public servant for a politician. What are they there for? They're there to serve the public. And if they're not thinking about how best to serve us, they're in the wrong job and they're not doing their job well. So I'd like to see more folks with that orientation. And I also love the idea of saying vote policy and issue, not personality.
Yeah.
Personalities don't get you anything.
No, it's true. And then also, oftentimes people just think national, but really, I feel like true politics starts very locally. And sometimes it starts as local as your neighborhood, getting to know your neighborhood, who are having meetings about, what's going on is a really good preview of how the process starts and then elevate it from there. So I have, actually, I was going to ask you guys, do you have any questions for each other that you were curious as you guys were hearing your own overviews that you'd like to ask each other before I move on to another question?
I feel like it's easier for me to agree with David on the issues that he raises because I think they're right. I'm adding something to that and saying I think there is a role for government to make the structure so that it's easier for everyone to obtain opportunity. I do think that's an important role. It takes someone who thinks as a public servant, as a politician. And sometimes that means getting government out of the way. Sometimes it means tweaking things through, tax incentives and the like, so that markets behave in a way that is providing more opportunity. I agree that, taken as a whole, the government has a checkered history in terms of contributing to the economy. I think that's fair. I may be too optimistic about this, but I'd at least like to try the optimistic position that with the right set of politicians in there, if we can vote them in, who have the right motive to be public servants, and think about public policy in the way that I articulated it, some safety net, but also some equaling of opportunity, then government could actually contribute to the private enterprise that drives the economy. Could be a good complement to it. That may be hopelessly optimistic, I don't know, but
No,
I'd
it's
like
good to have
retain that
optimism.
shred of optimism. Yeah, because without that, they're going to keep doing things that are making stuff worse, right? I mean, they're not helping us. That's not a good outcome either. So.
I'll ask Jeff a question with this context. In 1920, roughly, government as a percent of GDP was 6%, as a percent of our gross domestic product, 6%, right? Small. Today, government as a percent of GDP is over 30%, a third of our gross domestic product, right? And so when I think about it is, wait a second, when I look at my tax bill and when I look at my government spending, almost half of my income goes to government, state and federal, okay? So the question that I would have for Jeff is, how is it that government is improving things versus my ability to keep more of my money with my family, to do more in my community, and to invest locally to do better for our local community, versus me giving it to government and going somewhere else?
Yeah, and I understand how that can be frustrating too. I give the same proportion of my income, and it's like, wow. So it's always a good question to ask, what do I get for that? So just some facts first. The federal government is only 6 to 7% of the economy. The rest is state and local governments. And what state and local governments provide are really important services. The bulk of what state and local governments do is education, police, fire, and so on. If you look at their budgets, that's most of what they do. So those are basic services that are provided within the town. And those, we don't want to privatize those things. So that changes the landscape a bit. Within the 6% that the federal...
Hold on, Jeff. Let's be very clear. In Massachusetts, Medicaid is almost 50% of our budget, state budget. So police and fire, less than 10%, okay? Medicaid, 50%. So let's make sure we have the right data, because the question I'm asking is really important from the perspective of folks like us who pay taxes and who don't see sometimes the benefit of better roads, better schools.
So Medicaid is a state and local expenditure, but it's funded by the federal government. So that is part of the 6%, actually, if it's properly accounted for. But yes, if you look at how they spend funds that are given to them by the federal government.
40% is reimbursed in Massachusetts by the federal, 60% state.
So then the question is, what is Medicaid for, right? And do we think that's a good expensive money? So what Medicaid does is provides health care for low-income folks. That's what it does. We could argue about whether it does that efficiently, whether it should be there at all. I would argue that's a thing that we do want to do some of. We want to, folks who can't really afford decent healthcare, can't afford private health insurance. It's gotten better with the Affordable Care Act because there's more coverage through some of the exchanges, but it's not perfect. There are still people who need Medicaid. So that's important. And, so again, legitimate question. I just want to clarify, it's still the case that at the federal level, that's not a large fraction of it. And what the federal government spends money on primarily are two large programs, Medicare and Social Security. The public support for Medicare and Social Security is very high. Medicare, of course, like everything else in the healthcare system, needs some work. We don't do anything in healthcare terribly efficiently. It's never really been run as a business. It's getting better on the margin, but only very slightly. So that's an important thing, but that's a lot of where the federal budget goes. The federal budget percentages that go to food stamps, aid to family, what used to be called aid to families with dependent children, are each of them less than 3% of the federal budget. So much less than, a few tenths of a percent of the overall economy. Small expense at the federal level. State and local, yes, Medicaid's an important thing, but that's, then you have to argue about whether you want to provide those medical services for people who are in low-income circumstances. What I'd hope is they get out of the low-income circumstances for all kinds of reasons, and then they're not reliant on Medicaid. That would be great. I don't think we're in that state just yet. So,
I do have a comment.
I appreciate it, Jeff. Let me just respond, Evelyn. Look, here's the reason for my question. If you break down Medicaid, and I don't want to dwell on Medicaid, but there are 2.8 million people in Massachusetts on Medicaid out of 6.3 million residents. Almost half of residents aren't low income in Massachusetts. We know that to be true. The real question, though, that I'm asking is, can I, as a private citizen, if I kept more of my money, make smarter, informed decisions about my community than government? I think the answer from my point of view is absolutely. And that's why I asked the question. Because what happens to some of us who are paying taxes is a significant part of the income I've earned goes elsewhere that doesn't truly necessarily benefit my local community. That's why I'm asking the question.
No, and I get that. I think it's always a good question to ask, where your dollars go and whether you're getting something for the taxes you pay. So at the state level, the fact that Medicaid is a big share of it, again, that's about, yes, if you think, I'm not an expert on Medicaid, but if you think that there are too many people getting Medicaid benefits, we should look into that. But writ large, those governments exist for a reason. They're trying to do things, at least in theory, that the private sector and individuals can't do well. National defense, provision of public goods, certain types of health insurance and other kinds of insurance that the private market can't handle very well. And that's what we pay for. But where that's not done efficiently, or where they're doing things that don't deliver real value, I'm always open to discussion about that, because heaven knows those governments are not all operating the way we would like them to. But for some key things, they do what they're supposed to. I'll tell you that the institution I came from, which is indirectly but still publicly funded, the Federal Reserve, their job is to do the best they possibly can to make sure as many people are employed and keep inflation from getting out of hand. Good mission. I think they deserve every penny they get. They work really, really hard. If you ask me if that's true for every government agency, no, probably not. Probably not. Social Security, that's pretty popular. That helps people survive in retirement in many cases, and that's a big part of the budget. The defense budget is also large. That's a big fraction of federal. And, that's a much more complicated discussion, which we'll leave for another day. But I appreciate the question. I think it's right. We should be questioning these things, because you do spend your hard-earned money to get some of these services. Some of them are really important. And, at the local level, for sure, when I talked about education, police, fire, that at the local level is a huge fraction of local budgets. And those things we probably want to keep going. The state level, it is a somewhat different story.
Right. So this is a really great discussion. And there was a follow-up question that I'm going to pause on because it's related to healthcare outcomes. But I want us to switch gears. And before we do that, I'd like to just make a quick comment. It sounds like from what you guys are both describing is that government is an important part of this equation in our society, but shouldn't be a huge player. In other words, you're describing a stakeholder process where there's government, community, corporate, private sector, and so forth. And like when I heard David's question related to taxes and kind of like, where is it going? Both, I think it was more targeted toward like, how can I invest this money on my own that serves my community? The thoughts that come to mind are like, where is the receipts? Where people, I've heard that comment from Cardi B, and as funny as she is, she actually has a point about having more government accountability. Just the same way you go and purchase something, you get taxed, you know exactly where it goes. I think oftentimes the frustration that many citizens have is like, where is this going? And don't give me a large bulk where it's like percentage, goes to, education, and education is so vast and large. And I think people just want to know that it's justified versus feeling that it's going into a hole that they don't completely understand or see. But with that said, I want to sort of switch gears and get into the conversation related to meritocracy that I know has been part of your outline, Jeff, as well as something that's often discussed and debated in terms of what are your views on meritocracy? Does it, from your perspective, how do you define it? And do you agree that it exists or not?
I think what I think meritocracy means is that you get what you deserve based on what you've put in, what you've earned, what you've contributed. Is that the way I'd like the world to be? Absolutely. Is it that way some of the time? Yep, sometimes. Is it that way for everybody? No, I don't believe so. is again, it's difficult for me to look at the aggregate statistics where there are just, so 25% of families in the United States have all-in income, including the benefits they get from the government in cash and in kind, of $30,000 or less. Okay, so 25% of families. That's a lot of families. There are, depends on how you count this, 90 million families in the United States, 120 million, depends on whether you count households or families. It's a lot of families. Are they all getting what they deserve? Most all of them are employed. Many of them are employed at 2 jobs. Is that an economy that I feel is working the best it can and that people are getting all that they put into the economy? I don't think so. And again, it's easy. It's a little too easy to wash it in just in the high level statistics. But so when I interviewed people for the book I'm publishing, people who live in low income circumstances, you don't find people who are trying to figure out how to milk the system. You find people who are working hard. They are putting something in. They're not getting enough back. And I think that's a fault of the way our system is set up. I hope more of them can work their way out of it. I hope with Conexion, with sound economic decisions, financial decisions, budgeting, and so on, many of them can get to better circumstances. But it's just difficult to look at those, and there are hundreds of other statistics, and say the meritocracy is working, everybody's getting exactly what they deserve. Because to say that means that's what those people deserve, and I have a hard time saying a quarter of our families deserve to live on $30,000 a year or less. And if you look at there's a poverty line, which is around $27,000 for a family of 4. That's the poverty line. But if you look at what it actually costs to live in smaller metropolitan areas, smaller cities, forget about Boston, it's crazy. Smaller cities in Oklahoma, in Montana, around the country, small 5,000, 10,000 cities, you cannot possibly meet your basic expenses on $30,000 a year. That wouldn't be so bad. I wouldn't be so bad about it if those families that are at 30,000 are likely to be at 40 and 15, 60 and $70,000 in the next few years. But the data that tracks individuals, families and individuals' incomes over their lifespans, so that they do not, on average, move up to much greater prosperity. There's some of that, but not nearly enough. So the point is, it's not a temporary phenomenon, and it's sobering to think that many people live with those sorts of resources, even after getting whatever government assistance they can. So no, I don't think the meritocracy is operating. I think it's a great aspiration, and it worked for me. Aren't I lucky, right? Aren't I fortunate? You bet I worked hard. My colleagues at work used to say, "You're a machine, Jeff," and it's like, I don't think that's really a compliment, but I'll take it as saying, yes, I did work hard to get where I am. But I don't think that's all that my success owes to. I think there are a bunch of other factors. I was born on second or third base probably, and got driven home by some excellent hitters.
Evelyn, I would say that the United States of America is the greatest country, if not the only country in the world, where one can go in one generation from zero or low income to wealth. I'm living proof. I would say that it's the reason why millions of immigrants come to our country's shores when they leave Dominican Republic or Brazil or any other country, take your pick, because they want to tap into the opportunity that our country offers. I would also say that if you look at 1920, the poverty rate in America was 60%. Today, it's less than 10%. And so is this the land of the opportunity? Yes. Can someone here with the right education, with the ability, the mindset, the social network, achieve wonderful things? Yes. The final thing I'll say is that we also have to step back and understand that success and wealth are both subjective, right? It's our own definition. We shouldn't compare ourselves to Jeff Bezos. I'll never be as wealthy as Jeff Bezos, but B, it takes time. It used to take 2 to 3 generations to build wealth in America. Today, it takes less than 1.5. And so we have to understand, step back and look at the positives first, and then say, okay, if we're talking about the folks that have gotten here or live in urban areas and have gotten here the last 10, 30 years, it takes time. Versus we have this vision, not suggesting Jeff is saying this, But versus some of the stuff I hear sometimes, America's unequal. We should all have an equal opportunity. I respond to people, look, if you look at the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, it doesn't guarantee me happiness. It gives me the ability to pursue happiness. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to control what I can control.
I just to respond to that, I want to affirm, for one thing, that yeah, I'm not one of these people who says, "Oh, let's get out of this country. It's not any good." There is a reason people come here. Several of the people I interviewed for my book were folks who are recent immigrants from Central America who are fleeing gang violence. There was no economic opportunity. There was no safety, personal safety, and family safety. They had family members murdered. This is a place that they come to, and there are obvious reasons for that. So of course, we are doing better than many other places. So I levy these criticisms out of love for the country that I grew up in. I'm not going to live anywhere else, and I don't see a place that's better, but I do see room for improvement. And I hope we can always have that discussion. Love it, stay with it, and work with it to make it better where you can. But yeah, I mean, there's a tendency among many of us, I think I am guilty of this, that when we start in a discussion, rather than starting by acknowledging all the stuff that's good, we immediately go to the stuff to criticize. That's probably unfortunate. You do need to get there because there are things that we can do to make the country better. Absolutely. But not for a second would I say, I'd rather be in country X, Y, or Z. I wouldn't. It's not where I want to be for many of the reasons that David said. So just want to make that really clear. Likewise, capitalism. There are people who say, well, let's just get rid of the whole capitalist system. I've written the book. I don't say that. I say, no, we need capitalism. We actually have designed capitalism in a particular way. Some of it really good. Some of it could be improved. I believe we can improve our version of market-based capitalism, not abandon it, but improve it. So, and just to make that all clear, because yeah, I tend to zoom in on the negative, the stuff that needs to be fixed, and that's not great for this forum.
I have a quick follow-up for you, Jeff. You said something about second and third base, being born on second and third base.
Yeah.
Can you just give examples of what that means for our audience that might not be familiar with that term?
Yeah, the metaphor is, not everybody plays baseball. I played baseball when I was a kid. I love baseball, but the baseball metaphor is, there are people who think that they've hit a home run in life, like a walk-off. They got up to the plate, the pitch came, it was a fastball, high and outside, and they smashed it over the right field wall, and that's all them. Life is not that simple. So that is true for some folks who have the opportunity and the grit and the determination. Some of them hit the home run pretty much by themselves. For many of us, we started off on second base or third base, and we got to home to score the run, to be successful, because somebody else drove us in. They got a base hit and drove us off of second or third base. That for me, that's important in the following way. So what did I have growing up? David said he grew up in a blessed family. So did I. We were not high income. We were middle income. Just right, middle. That's a great start, actually. That's a good thing. It means that we didn't have to worry about whether we would have food on the table. I got to go to some of the best educational institutions in the world, and I got out of those without debt. And that's partly because I worked before going to college and during college and all that. So I worked and contributed, and I got some scholarships, great. And then my folks contributed everything they could. You better believe that's an advantage. I have to say, in this country, being a white guy is not a bad thing. It does not hurt. I don't have the standing to comment on anybody else's experience. I'll just say I can see with hindsight now that being born into a white family, that helped. So did having a stable family circumstance. I completely agree with David on this. Family foundation, critical. Mine own was great. My parents are still married at the age of 90 after now. What is it? They're coming up on 66 years of marriage. Just finished 66 years of marriage. My wife and I tried to emulate that. We've been married for 42 years now. We got married when we were 8. I'm revealing my age, but we've been married for 42 years. Does that matter? It does to me. Now I'm fortunate because there aren't a lot of people that would stick with me for 42 years, but she has. And like David, I'm blessed to have this person who is just much better than me. So yes, all those things matter. Those are things that put me on at least second base, I think. Not everybody has those advantages, and they do make a difference. Can you overcome them if you don't have it? Yes, but it ain't easy, and it'd be nice to make things essentially easier for everybody. Let's have everybody born on second base. How about that? That would be great.
Thank you for answering. And then I have one more question, and then I'm going to read a comment, and then we're going to begin transitioning to a close. But this question is for David. How does having social capital impact someone's chances of experiencing success? Does it matter?
Define social capital.
Social capital can mean social networks, folks that have opened the doors for you, have a network of individuals that have literally, have the power and influence to open doors for you.
Yeah, so look, social capital, so there's variations of this. There are people who, like Jeff said, might be born into wealthy families that have a network, wealth, et cetera. There are those that might be born into working class families and have to earn their way and may not have social networks that bring, let's call it professional value. And there are those folks like me who are born low income and have to earn their way in whatever way that means. For those folks that are born into social capital, good for them. I don't envy, I don't hate. I bless them. I pray for them and say, good job. Most people in the United States are not born into wealthy families, right? The very wealthy in America are 3%. Most people in America are born into the either working class or middle class. And so all of us that are born into these, let's call it low income or middle class spheres, we have to earn our way and build our networks. And so they're crucial. And I encourage people to do as much as they can, but at the same time, understand that you cannot control a network. If I'm a case in point. In Massachusetts, when I started working in Boston, a lot of networks didn't let me in. And my response was, well, fine. If you don't want to give me a seat at the table, I'm going to create my own table. And that's still my mindset. And so social capital and networks are, of course, they're important. But if the social capital or social network does not align with your values or your beliefs or your value system, either build your own or control what you can control. So the reason for that answer, Evelyn, is the social capital or social network you have should not define who you are. You should define who you are and your journey and your path. But yes, they're important. It's wonderful to have a group of people that you can connect with, network with, maybe open doors for you. But ultimately, if you don't have it, build it or build your own.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm just going to read a comment from the chat. It wasn't exactly a question, but I wanted to just sort of highlight it. They were saying, I disagree that the problem is the system. The problem is more related to misunderstanding of basic economic principles, the kind of wealth creation that was mentioned tonight. Sometimes it requires the pooling of resources for those at the lower end of economic spectrum. It requires self-sacrifice like that to overcome obstacles and rise out of poverty. That's basic economics. We need more of that and less blaming of the system. So that's just a perspective that I just wanted to share. And then also I wanted to close and say just two things. I've really appreciated hearing both of you have this discussion. I learned a couple things about Medicare and the percentage of our GDP that I didn't realize I didn't know about the federal and state. That was very new to me. I do think that government plays a critical role in the well-being of a society. And I think that although the United States, is not perfect, it also just, the American spirit of trying to improve and doing so with true and hard facts, that there are a lot of inequities that do exist, but there's also opportunities. And I think it really requires communities, not only in government, corporate, and so forth, but even communities like Conexion and other nonprofits that also play a role in shifting that public policy. I don't think there's a silver bullet. So I really appreciate you guys sharing both your personal stories and also your perspective from your professional background, because I think you've highlighted the importance of how we define self-agency while also trying to navigate what challenges we see within our current system, which is imperfect worldwide. The United States is not unique in that way. But I think the fact that we feel comfortable criticizing it just means that we love it so much in a way that we want to just see it become better. And so I really salute and thank you for all the work that you do. And to the audience of Conexion, thank you so much for staying with us and participating in the chat. I mean, I feel your questions, I wish I could see your faces, but we hope that in the near future we could have in person. And these topics and discussions are really because of the investments made from our community and also our sponsors and partners that really believe in the mission of really elevating Latino leadership, both in representation, but more importantly, giving back, and also showing that with the spirit of community, we can do a lot of great things. And I think, something that Jeff and David touched on is the power of narrative. And these type of discussions and dialogue is literally making sure that the narratives that sometimes are not represented in the media, we have to make sure that they're represented in the way we have these type of dialogues, and more importantly, working on that. But if, I am the chair of Conexion, so I will ask that if you can support Conexion in any way that you can, your treasured time is greatly appreciated. I'm sure Carlos will share a link and maybe a follow-up on how you can donate. And with that said, thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Phyllis so that we'll have closing remarks.
Okay, Carlos, do you want to turn my camera back on, please? Let's see, the host has asked you to start your video. Okay. There I am.
There we go.
Who knew? Who knew? Well, I want to thank all of you for being here, for listening. And I think these are important conversations. I was very proud of myself. I was able to be quiet the entire time because these are topics that are near and dear. It's the basis for what Conexion is about. It is about creating, we called it Conexion for a reason. It's about connections. It's about making connections. And we can choose with whom we affiliate. And it isn't solely about community affiliating for our own benefit. As you know, you guys that have been through Conexion and our mentors as well, it's really about expanding that network as well, which is why I feel so fortunate in terms of the mentors that we have, that they are opening up their networks to many of you that are their mentees, and vice versa, to the extent that mentees remember it's a two-way street. Invite your mentor to some of the things that you're doing. So I think the more we step back, take a breath, recognize each other as human beings and are curious, have a level of civility. As you can see, Jeff and David don't always agree, and they also agree on a lot of things as well. So find those areas of agreement, build on that. And I think the things we don't agree on, it's food for thought. It certainly gives me food for thought. And I want to thank you all for coming. Next week, we're going to have, Lisa, can you put up the slide, honey? We're going to have a session, and this is an interesting session on fashion. And the reason that I find it interesting is that people think we're going to talk about fashion in a very traditional sense, like going through Vogue magazine or something, which is not what we're going to do. Jake Alderin, for those of you who know him, it's like a sociological journey into the role that fashion and our choices that we make has on us, and how when David started out earlier, I thought, oh, wow, he couldn't have done a better job of setting up for next week, which is, how do you show up? What choices do you make? And it comes up every year in Conexion about how we show up. And I won't go into it now because of the time, but how we present ourselves, even in our attire, our work, and all of that. There's just so much more we could say, but I'll stop. And again, I want to thank you for your attention. I hope that you'll share. We're going to share the link to this session so you can share with others who weren't able to join us tonight. I think we need to continue the dialogue, and I hope you can join us next week for this session on Wednesday, September 28th from 6 to 8 p.m. And in November 16th, we're going to have an in-person session, our culmination with EY is our host, and we're excited about that. And Dr. Betty Uribe, who is with JP Morgan Chase, and she's also the author of #Values. So she's going to speak on values as well, her own journey in terms of coming as an immigrant from Colombia as a little girl, and where she is today as a managing director at JP Morgan Chase in California. So again, another interesting program that'll be live and in person. So again, thank you all for joining us. It was delightful to see all of you. Thank you, Evelyn, Thank you, Jeff and David, for your active participation, Marquise for your support, and others. And thank you to our audience, our Conexionistas, and our guests for joining us, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you. Oh, and I forgot. Oh, one more thing. One more thing. I'm sorry. One more thing. We set the, just want to remind everybody, we're currently enrolling for next year. So the early and the mid-career program, we'll send out this information too. But again, we're actively enrolling now. And as the gentleman said, all of these folks are mentors in Conexion. So you can see the caliber of people that we're fortunate enough to have as mentors. So I would encourage you to enroll your employees if you're an employer. And if you're a Conexionista, work with your company to identify other individuals that you might want to nominate to be in Conexion. So thank you. And again, have a wonderful weekend, and I'll hopefully see you next week. Good night.